Hello and welcome. We were just surprised at the Game Awards last night with an announcement of the Xbox Series X. What was previously known as Project Scarlet now has a name and a bit more information to talk about with it. A bit of a surprise, but always a good one. So to talk about this, I'm joined by my colleague, John Linneman. How you doing there, John?
I'm doing pretty good, Alex. We're here on the scene in a different camera position than usual because we just had to sort of discuss this thing. The Tower, the Xbox Series X, as they call it. That's a name I could probably get used to. I mean, it does sound very automobile-like, if you will.
Yeah, and I guess the term series as well kind of implicates, that there could possibly be a family of products that we're talking about here, and not just a single thing like a PlayStation 5, which we presume will be the only model there.
I think Phil made some comments about that, actually, which suggested that for them, it makes it easier to sort of roll out different names, which also kind of supports this idea that they kind of really did with the Xbox One S and X, where it's like you have the two model tier, and we have, we kind of know that that's what they want to do with these next generation machines as well. So it makes sense to use a name that can be easily changed to fit sort of the spec of the machine. But the machine today, as we know it, is the high-end machine. So
yeah, that's what it sounds like. And whether or not the other machine will have an S at the end of the name, kind of like the Xbox One S moniker before, which I would think would be very consistent, or whether it'll have a different sub-name altogether is something obviously that needs to reveal itself in the future. But I guess it would kind of also implicate that what we knew before as Lockhart, as in a smaller Xbox that had a smaller GPU footprint, is perhaps probably still alive based upon this naming scheme.
But today, I guess what we do know now is that we have seen the form factor and the new controller, and I think this is really interesting. Taking a book from, obviously, the pages of NEC with their PCFX console back in the 90s, Microsoft decided to go for a primarily vertical orientation. And I really like it, actually. It's very simple. So I think one of the things that people have kind of maybe misunderstood is that it does give the impression of being a very big box, but when you look at it compared to the controller and what they've said about it, it actually seems like it's going to be a very small little device that's kind of, think like one of those tall Amazon Echo speakers, but obviously wider and more square. Mm-hmm. But I think, it might be difficult to fit into an entertainment system. Like for me, I'm going to have to put it in a different spot than I normally would. But I really like the look of it. I think that's really cool. And they've confirmed it, but I'm very happy to see that the optical drive is still there. Thank God, because we don't need another Xbox One, sad. But then also there's the controller, which at a glance looked just like the Xbox One pad. But if you actually look closely, aside from obviously the addition of the share button, which is kind of a big thing, I guess, there is some change to the design. The front of the pad is a little bit more flat. It lacks some of the ridges on the Xbox that we see on the Xbox One controller. And also they sort of brought over sort of a D-pad that's similar to the Xbox One, the Elite controller, the second Elite controller that was just recently released. So I think that's a pretty cool idea.
I've kind of always loved the asymmetric style of design that they've gone for a long time now, obviously. And I do actually really like the Xbox One X controller, and I didn't think it need any big, large changes other than perhaps they mentioned in an interview basically that it now fits hands better of different sizes rather. So it's has a bit more.
Yeah, and I think it's a nice looking pad, and it seems like Microsoft's really sort of settled down with the design, and I'm okay with that. I mean, Sony did that for 3 generations, I guess, where the PlayStation 1, once they had the DualShock, so the DualShock 1, 2, and 3 all looked basically identical, with just very slight functionality differences, and then obviously they changed it for the 4. Microsoft's always changed the pad with each new generation, but this is probably the smallest change yet, and I get it, because I think that they absolutely nailed it with the original Xbox One pad. So, like you say, this is probably just one of those iterative changes that just adds the features and comfort that just to refine it a little bit beyond. So first impressions of the physical box are positive, but I guess we have a little bit more information about what's under the hood. Yeah,
John, we basically have more information about the GPU now, which is something we also didn't know in the past necessarily. We had an idea of what kind of architecture it would be running on, Navi, RDNA, but not necessarily a good understanding of its level of performance, because performance figures used in the past were primarily talking about the CPU, this kind of 4x figure that was given in the past. And now I have quote unquote from the man himself. "We wanted to have a dramatic upgrade from Xbox One base console," says Spencer. "So when we do the math, we're over 8 times the GPU power of the Xbox One and 2 times what an Xbox One X is." Now, they don't actually, or Phil Spencer doesn't say anything about, the old flops, teraflops figure that we would expect, from like previous rhetoric from when the Xbox One X was launched and things like that. So it is a bit confusing to see them using power multipliers essentially to describe the performance. But from what we know, basically a circa 9.7 teraflop 5700 XT, an RDNA chip that AMD released earlier this year, that's already in practical performance in many games, 2 times the power of the Xbox One X in GPU load scenarios. So the question is, does these numbers given out by Phil Spencer here represent something like that, a 9.7 to 10 teraflop chip? Or does it actually align with things that, pundits are saying, or that Windows Central brought out most recently, that it is a 12 teraflop chip, so it's 6 teraflops in Xbox One X, and 2 times that amount of power is 12 teraflops. I don't know why they worded it this way. It's actually confusing to me because, obviously the industry standard is to talk in terms of teraflops.
You're right, Alex, but we've talked about this before, I think, where it was kind of suspected that for this next generation, the companies would try to avoid talking about teraflops. Because these next generation GPUs, I guess, if you want to call them next generation, they're more efficient, right? And I think if you just throw around the teraflop number as we have in the past, it's a little deceptive, and it suggests perhaps a leap not quite as great as we will actually see in practice necessarily. So I think it's just a marketing thing where they're just afraid to roll out the teraflop numbers for that reason. I think that's really all it is.
I would imagine that's the case, because if it is actually 12 teraflops, which would be wonderful for the next generation of consoles, it would also imply that it is a GPU that has higher thermal constraints than an 5700 XT, and also is decidedly more powerful than that.
That's right.
I don't know how necessarily realistic that is in terms of wattage that is put in a home console. It would be kind of going into the unprecedented area for the most recent generations of consoles, I would say, if the GPU were that large in the end. So I'm not exactly sure what to make of it, but people are saying 12 teraflops out there, but it's hard to really get a head around it.
I mean, you're certainly right about this, but I think evidenced by the design of the box itself, it's clear that cooling plays a significant role. They put a lot of engineering effort into the cooling system for Xbox One X, and I think it's pretty clear that they've sort of, further refined those techniques here. And the vertical design makes a lot of sense. You have that big fan on top, so it sort of just pulls it up through this chamber. And even the drive is mounted vertically, so it does kind of have that look where I suspect the way it's built is that it could maybe handle some pretty significant heat from the GPU and the CPU, really. I mean, obviously, we'll have to wait and see on that. But that's not the whole story still on the GPU, I think. We don't know specifically, but they have mentioned again ray tracing, right?
Yeah, and they also mentioned variable rate shading, which they described in an interesting way, saying it's patented.
What is up with that?
Variable rate shading exists as part of the DirectX API now, obviously, and it's been theorized for years before it even came out in official supported forms from GPU manufacturers under NVIDIA's Turing. I don't know why they call it patented, but we've seen great performance uplifts from it, especially most recently 3D Mark released a small prepped a small benchmark where you could see great uplifts of performance by utilizing VRS features. So it's something also that'll make, I don't like using the phrase, but it'll make this GPU hit harder with minimal drops to quality on the screen in front of you, which is great.
I think it's very effective for a console.
Yeah.
because developers can target directly using variable rate shading, whereas in the PC it's kind of an optional thing that only works on specific GPUs at the moment.
And like 2 titles. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, again, that makes sense to have in the console. All of these things kind of fit in, and I think that they could be utilized well. It's just we still don't know enough about what this hardware accelerated ray tracing feature will offer, like how potent it is. So
yeah, but we did at least get confirmation beyond those GPU features of also that it is using an NVMe SSD drive. I would presume huge. It is using some sort of standard market solution there in terms of its interface. I would assume that, perhaps it is not. But so we could be seeing PCIe Gen 4 speeds here, I would imagine.
Think about that though. This has potential. So obviously NVMe is extremely fast, right?
It's amazing.
I think we both use them in our computers. They're amazing drives. Now, that theoretically Microsoft could include some sort of like expansion port with a second NVMe controller, or like a port. You know what I mean?
That'd be incredible.
And you could set it up in such a way where it's essentially like they could put the drive within like a small cartridge and sell that, right? I mean, I guess you could theoretically buy an off-the-shelf one, but I would see with the way Microsoft's been that they would do something more like sell it as an external solution.
I like the idea of the way you're describing it now, and it makes me wonder why Sony, up until this, obviously up until this day, obviously things can change in hours, haven't announced exactly what the technology is behind their SSD drive. It was pretty cool to see Microsoft actually talk about that, and I really do hope, like you just described, that there is some way to really easily plug in more hard drive space, because over time NVMe drives, much like SSDs, they're just going to get more dense, and you're going to want to, with large next gen games, you're going to want to probably upgrade that space over time. We've seen it this gen, why not this most recent gen as well?
And then another feature I think that's worth talking about is the sleep state for multiple games. This is a huge deal because this has been a game changer for me on current generation consoles, and it's one of the reasons I've ended up playing more games on consoles than PC, I think, is the convenience of when you're playing a game, just being able to stop at any point, put the system to sleep, and then come back the next day and continue. It works very well on PlayStation 4. It's almost flawless. I've had a lot of issues on the Xbox One using the sleep mode, but the fact that they're promising this here and it's going to be available straight away rather than as an experimental feature, at least I hope it's not, that the option to basically sleep a bunch of games, save the memory and the state of the game, that is a huge deal in terms of just getting back into games. I mean, at the same time, they are promising much improved loading times, so hopefully even getting into the games in the first place won't be as painful, but just being able to jump in where you were and stop at any point, that's big for anybody playing the game, but it's also really big for people like us that have to test these games. You know what I mean?
Where you have to constantly go back in and out of the game. I mean, there's so many times where that's annoyed the hell out of me.
Yeah, exactly.
To be honest with you.
Especially with, I think we were just looking at Master Chief Collection recently, and I swear getting in and out of that is a huge pain.
There's a lot to talk about that game. But I also do not like necessarily the menu setup there.
Oh, also, before, we should probably touch on real quick that they once again confirmed backwards compatibility across all generations. So, it's going to continue to support the original Xbox games and Xbox 360 games. I assume it'll be the same list. And maybe, I hope they expand upon it further.
I don't see why it would be reduced at all. That's the one thing. I've saw people online worrying about it due to the wording of the information put out already, that perhaps there would be a lessened list of backwards compatible games. But based upon the way Microsoft has set up backwards compatibility of basically turning these EXEs into games, into x86 capable EXEs, I don't think that's going to be the case at all.
I think it's just going to work exactly like the current Xbox One.
That's the way I see it.
It'll be the same games, and then it also seems like Xbox One games will just run natively on the new hardware, kind of as we expected. And at least based on the results we've seen with the X, I also expect that this will boost performance on a lot of games. So games that already have performance issues, or say uncapped frame rates and can't really hit the 60 FPS target, maybe this new machine will be able to deliver that. So that's very promising.
And games that have these awesome forward-looking dynamic resolution modes where they target 4K, but probably are somewhere a bit above 1440p rather often, they could probably very easily be pushed up to native 4K all the time.
We saw that with Xbox One X already, where like games like Halo 5, for instance, before it was patched for the X, if you just played the regular version, it did run at the full 1080p, just instead of dropping down to near 720p. So it already like bumped the dynamic resolution up to the ceiling, and it just hung there, in addition to providing better texture filtering. So I expect we're going to see the exact same kind of improvements this time around. Although it is interesting that they've already been talking about games being multi-generation again, like big first-party stuff. Like I think we saw that Halo, the new
Halo's a launch title, basically, I believe was confirmed as well. So that would be probably simultaneous launch on Xbox Series X and Xbox One X and Xbox One S and Xbox One.
I mean, I gotta admit that is actually just a tad disappointing.
Yeah.
I understand why they do it. And I know cross-gen games are always a thing, but, you know, I can't imagine, you know, a lot of times when we've had cross-gen games, they were clearly designed for the new generation first and foremost, and the last-gen versions would suffer a lot. I can't imagine a first-party Microsoft title doing that, which suggests that the scope of the game may end up being limited in some way.
Yeah, that base Xbox One for cross-gen titles is not going to be too great.
I would be okay if they just stopped supporting the base Xbox One, to be honest.
I would be completely fine with that, or maybe
the X would make a great baseline.
Yeah, maybe it only works for like multiplayer, kind of like we saw last gen regarding, what was it, Black Ops 3?
Oh, Black Ops 3.
Yeah, which had that weird kind of release. Maybe we'll see something like that as well over time. I don't imagine the initial titles will actually see something like that, but games that are stripped out of features, stripped out of content for their previous gen release. Maybe. I would like it that way. Fresher start.
All right, so what else is on the slate then to talk about?
I guess it's kind of the games that were shown. The one game that was shown, which is Senua's
Sacrifice.
Senua's Sacrifice, Hellblade 2?
2.
Something like that?
Hellblade 2.
Hellblade 2?
Yeah, Hellblade 2. Yeah.
With music from the band Heilung, if you've ever heard of them too. They're a pretty wacky band, interesting music. But the trailer itself, I really did enjoy the first game, just wonderful looking game. And now with this trailer, and it looks to be targeting, they haven't announced if it is targeting Xbox One X or Xbox One as well. I don't think it was announced. But this looks like a proper next-gen game in terms of like the poly count you're seeing on the Senua character, which is just absurd looking. I mean, I cannot see a single edge polygon in this trailer.
Yeah, the quality of the shading and the skin work is tremendous. I mean, it does start to reveal a little bit of that uncanny valley though, where like, like it's so real now that you can see even clearer some of the flaws. But even still, it's definitely. I mean, the original game already looked amazing, and this is a step up. I mean, it's one of the best looking character models I've ever seen. And since they say it's a real-time demonstration, or at least it's in-engine for now, I mean, it's always weird when talking about these demos when they say in-engine, because it often does mean target render, but, you know, using the engine, but we'll see. Either way, though, it's very promising, and I think the most promising thing is actually the environments they showed. They're still very desolate, but if you looked around the original game, there was actually a lot of evidence. You could see where they had to cut corners, right? There was plenty of sharp edges and limitations, where here just the background, though basic in terms of like, you know, it's very empty, it looked so like just perfect.
Yeah, I really loved a lot of like, tons of geo like on the ground of that beach scene that they also showed. Also just the general character models that they showed, most of which were obscured with depth of field, unfortunately, in the trailer. Obviously, we would love to see these assets, you know, in full 4K quality with no depth of field, but that's something obviously for a later date. One thing that I did look for, but due to the camera angles, and I would say also the excessive use of depth of field and excessive use of motion blur, was evidence of real-time ray tracing in the form of something like, I don't know, shadows or reflections or anything like that. It's in a trailer like this, there's no way to say anything basically of that nature. Yeah,
it's too cinematic and too post-proc heavy. It's really difficult to actually say for sure.
I would expect games like this utilizing UE4 to definitely support ray tracing, considering it's a base part of the engine now. but no evidence of it in this trailer at the moment.
I will say the expressions on Senua during that, it was borderline frightening. Like, she looks psychotic, and I mean, it's just the way she's staring at the screen, and like it was just, it's a little bit frightening in a good way. Like, it's really intense, and I mean, again, the first game specialized in this already, but this seems like a nice step up, and I'm really happy that Ninja Theory found success with that game. And yeah, this first look at it is absolutely stunning. But it wasn't the only, I guess you could say, next-gen game.
Yeah, this is true.
At the Keeleys. There was another one.
Godfall, yes. A Gearbox published title, which is running on UE4, is supposed to be kind of a slasher loot game, based upon the descriptions I've heard so far.
I'll be honest, Alex, that sounds awful to me.
That sounds like a game I definitely will not play in my free time. I don't like looter genre games necessarily, but in terms of visuals, it's an interesting thing to talk about because they've mentioned it targeting 60 FPS, I believe. It's releasing on PlayStation 5 and on PC on the Epic Games Store. UE4 as an engine has scaled really well this gen. It's been a bit heavy on consoles, obviously, so it's required some customization to actually, I would say, look and run good at the same time. You see that in titles like Gears 5.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you look back at the first games this generation powered by Unreal Engine 4, there was a horror game, I can't even remember the name now, that looked atrocious, and a few other things that came out. And then you look at where we arrived with something like Gears 5, which is just unbelievable. Though, again, there's a lot of custom code and design in that to like really push it to the next level, but clearly it's a very flexible engine. They push it super far this gen, and of course it's going to continue next generation.
Yeah, and I guess some things that I did notice, not necessarily in the trailer, but accompanying kind of their press release, there were a number of released GIFs as well, animated GIFs. Yes, I say it with the J sound.
There's going to be comments about the way you pronounce it, Alex.
But in one of these animated GIFs, there's a sequence where you can see a hammer passing in front of the reflection of a bush. Now, to me, that doesn't work at all with screen space reflections.
That's right.
So it kind of points towards perhaps RT reflections there, but in another point, you can see kind of underneath a shrine or a fountain, you can also see the reflection of the underside of this fountain or shrine, something impossible with SSR. I don't know if it's just a really opportune placement of planar reflections, which is also possible, but I would imagine given UE4 consoles and platform it's releasing on, I wouldn't mind saying that it's RT reflections.
I can't even recall if Unreal Engine 4 even supports planar reflections at this point.
It does, I think in an update targeted at VR usage because they realized SSR.
Oh, yes. I would think that this is not planar reflections then. So I think you might be right about this being an example of ray tracing. But I guess the big question here is, they say it's PS5 and PC. I think the trailer is probably PC.
I would imagine too, because obviously...
I mean, why would it be anything else at this point? That just makes sense if you're going to produce a trailer.
Yeah, especially one, that is produced at this fidelity. I don't think their code is going to be working perfectly at the moment on, PlayStation 5 dev kits necessarily.
That's not to say that there's nothing here that suggests that it couldn't be done on PS5. It's just we're at this early point where just realistically in terms of the development process, I would expect them to produce a demo that's, it's just PC based, but I suspect it represents obviously the target that they're aiming for.
Yeah, I'd agree as well. But, a game I wouldn't necessarily play, but one that shows hints about what we can maybe expect for next generation graphics.
Precisely. I mean, it looks good. It looks very good.
I guess any kind of rounding off thoughts there, John, about this reveal, the surprise reveal of the Xbox Series X?
I mean, for me, honestly, the only surprise is the form factor. A lot of the other stuff, we kind of understood basically what was going to be in the box.
For me, I guess that's really the only surprise as well. Its form factor, which I actually surprisingly really like. The one thing that I'm really slightly disappointed in is that there wasn't a great clarification about what it exactly is meant by GPU power. I mean, I don't like being so finicky, but it is really great to hear things like how many teraflops this is and like specifics. I just like those things. So I'm kind of at a toss-up now. I really want it to be 12 teraflops, but the kind of more conservative angle in me regarding consoles in terms of wattage makes me want to assume maybe that it also is like 5700 XT performance, if not better.
I mean, it's the same with the CPU, where we know it's an 8-core Zen 2 with 16 threads, right? But we still don't know the actual frequency that it's running at. So there's still a lot of details to be revealed here.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to be still revealed. I guess we're gonna have to be waiting toward later in the coming year of 2020, when pre-E3 season, I would imagine Sony's already gonna have information out there like they did for the PS4 reveal, and so, then Microsoft's gonna respond. Maybe this whole wishy-washy discussion about not mentioning teraflops is to get one-ups on each other. I don't know.
Actually, that's kind of a funny point. You notice last generation, the PS4 shows up with this big splash, and it kind of blew everybody out of the water at the time, right? Whereas this time, it feels like both companies are kind of taking turns revealing more and more of their boxes, you know what I mean? It's like they're both like inching their way out the door, like ready to pounce on whatever they think the competition might do next. It's a fun thing to watch.
It's funny. It's thankfully not so frustrating, but I imagine in the end we're gonna once again be seeing extremely similar boxes.
Oh yeah.
Very similar. That's what I'm gonna say.
I expect them to be very, very similar. More similar. They're probably going to be more similar this time than what we saw last gen with Xbox One and PS4. So
100%. Yeah, but John, thank you for joining me.
Of course, Alex.
Always a pleasure. You know, this pre-holiday season, it's always good to talk to you. Because you, John,
yeah,
you're my friend and colleague, by the way.
Oh, friend and colleague.
Thanks for joining me.
Of course.
I hope you in the audience enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you are already a subscriber, then please consider hitting that little bell in the corner to be informed as soon as Digital Foundry posts a video. If you want to talk to John or myself about Xbox Series X or any other moniker you want to give it, write a comment below or follow John and myself on Twitter. And support us on Patreon for the highest quality videos that Digital Foundry offers. And I guess until next time, this is John and Alex bidding you auf Wiedersehen und
watch the new DF Retro tomorrow.
It's going to be excellent.